We're currently stuck in quarantine, but we're still providing you with content. Do you know why? Because you deserve it, okay? This is DM Talks, a podcast that aims to promote well-being and assist healing, whether that be physically, mentally, or spiritually. Ultimately, we just want to be seen in our entirety, and this podcast hopes to show listeners how multifaceted they are. We're all the centre of our own universe, so why don't we do more to better our own existence? Okay, so it is currently the 7th of April, it's Tuesday, and I'm sitting in my bedroom. It's super sunny, and I'm really, really happy today because I'm going to be talking about a subject that is so interesting to me. I've brought on a good friend. He's an academic. He is a force.
Oh.
He is a wizard.
I like all of the, increasingly literally a wizard, so.
Exactly, literally wizard. Amazing. Well, today I brought on my best friend Tom to talk about astrology. Say hi, Tom.
Hey, hi. I'm Thomas Sullivan, usually Tom. Thank you for having me on.
Introduce yourself a little bit. Tell DM Talks people who you are, what you do, and why I brought you here today. Or I can tell you that.
Closest thing I have to a day job is I'm a PhD student in social anthropology at the University of Manchester. I'm currently on my, I can't even count at this point, 3rd year of my PhD. It all starts to blur into one after a point. My anthropology is very difficult to define, but it's often defined as the comparative study of human culture. And the gimmick, so to speak, is that you spend a year, upwards of a year in cases, living with and really trying to do what other people do, as opposed to just interviewing them or just reading about them. So I spent most of 2019, before the event, living in a small town in Yorkshire, doing all kinds of vaguely defined New Age religious stuff.
What was the small town in Yorkshire?
Hebden Bridge.
Hebden Bridge. Oh, amazing.
Yeah, people who know.
What was it like living there for a year?
Oh, it was gorgeous. Surrounded by trees. It was a very strange period because doing that kind of research it's almost quite formal, but at the same time, I was just doing yoga every other day. And then going to coffee shops, and somehow I still got stressed. Somehow I still found problems. But it was a lot nicer than sitting in quarantine at this point.
Bless you.
But, yeah. But we're making the most of it, which is what we're here to talk about.
Exactly. It's quite, it's mad how Miss Corona has got us all in our houses. But I am actually really enjoying this period as well. I feel like it's very reflective, very, calming and stillness. Well, if you allow the stillness to happen.
Exactly. It's about a lot of people, I think, need this period of stillness and need a chance to calm down and to not go out and to really be with themselves. And it's as long as you're making it intentional, it can be really rewarding.
Mate, that's actually, you know what, you've nailed on the head there, because you're bringing me to my first segment, which is the divine. The divine is a section of the podcast that wants to shine a light on a good thing. So we normally nominate, I don't know, it could be a book, it could be a person, it could be a thing that you've seen in the media. But today I want to nominate Leona Nicole Black. She is an academic who also studies who also dwells massively into spirituality, whether it's to do with forms of astrology or tarot or other forms of divination. I've been following this woman for quite a while now. She has quite a large following. But anyway, not last Monday, I mean yesterday. All the days are blurring into one, aren't they?
Time is a very different thing these days.
Literally. But so yesterday, the 6th of April, she did her Instagram live, which is a tarot therapy session. And it's amazing. You should follow her on Instagram. Her handle is @Leona, Leona, Nicole, Nicole, and then Black. She's really cool. So that's her thing on Instagram. And basically, she did a reading with various cards. And one of the first cards that she used was from this sort of animal spirit, animal energy sort of oracle deck. And one of the oracle one of the cards, it was called the Wombat Spirit, and the message was "Be at home." And literally so fitting for the time that we are in now, because the wombat is not just necessarily talking about your physical space, but also your spiritual space. So this period, we're all collectively having to sort of be calm, make friends with the stillness, make friends with the uncertainty, because we're able to sort of appreciate sort of the blessings that come after that. I don't know how to explain it. Like,
exactly.
I guess personally for me, like, I'm really liking this period of, well, like liking this period of time, just because it's a time to sort of delve more into learning about myself. However, I do that quite a lot anyway, so for other people this time might be quite challenging, so it's sort of inviting ourselves to sort of give us the rest that we really needed. What about you?
Yeah, and I think for a lot of people, they don't necessarily know that you can go into yourself, so to speak. And so you can get very easily trapped in a cycle of thinking, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't go out. But if you change it around in your head to be more almost the inverse of that, think, what can I do? I can do this, I can do that, I can do that. And, you know, like the classic example that everyone's doing is watching all the TV shows they haven't seen.
Exactly.
Or even basic things like that, where you think, okay, I can't go to the pub, but I've still got this time. I've still got loads of things I can get on with.
Definitely.
And turning it around, yeah.
No, I wrote a list down, all the stuff that I was going to get round to, and I'm slowly just crossing things off that list. So next week, I'm going to start practicing braiding my hair again, because I was able to do it I was able to do like it here and there when I was younger, but I actually don't know how to like sort of cornrow, like feed in hair extensions into my braids. So that's a challenge and a sort of goal that I want to try and set myself when I come out of quarantine.
That's gorgeous, yeah. And something like that as well is something you can show off when you do leave, basically.
Exactly.
It's a really aesthetic skill.
What would you like to nominate for the Divine?
So on the topic of staying at home, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day who is in the vulnerable persons category.
Yeah.
And she is able to get VIP, essentially, delivery slots with supermarkets.
Oh, okay.
And I want to nominate delivery drivers, particularly, because there's loads of frontline staff, and we hear all the time about the NHS and even things like firefighters, but delivery workers have suddenly become the veins of the country. They're the people who are actually taking food and produce from door to door and putting themselves at a lot of risk in terms of not just the usual risk of being a delivery person where you might get someone being a bit aggressive to you, but on top of that, it's like you're in the face of people constantly, and so it's a really, really tough job that's suddenly become a lot more important than just getting a book from Amazon once a month.
You're so right. Shout out to all the delivery drivers.
Yeah,
no, that's beautiful nomination. I really, really enjoyed that. I want to ask also, during this quarantine period, what else have you learned, or what else have you learned to appreciate? You've just nominated the delivery drivers. What do you have anything else that you'd nominate? Sorry, that was really weird talking. Nominate sleep.
I think so, yeah, and specifically good sleep.
So your sleeping has improved?
It has actually, because I used to, before quarantine and the major lockdown, I was on that solid kind of 1 a.m. to 11 a.m. schedule.
Okay.
And now it's only slightly improved to midnight to 10, but having kind of control of your sleeping pattern, I think, is what has allowed me and a lot of other people to still have that sense of structure, as opposed to just going to bed at 3.
That is so true. Like, my sleeping pattern has so improved, like, since being this quarantine. Like, I think, like, even this morning, I woke up at, like, 9:20, and I was like, oh, refreshed. I just felt so, like, uplifted and just kind of, like, upbeat, you know? And the sun is shining, which I love to see.
Especially in this season where waking up early means that you get access to so much sunshine and vitamin D and just straight in there.
100%. Like, amazing. So, I want to get into our topic of today, and I invited you on because obviously you gave a little introduction earlier about how you do astrology. I've been going, I think I've spoke about it in snippets recently, but for listeners, could you just tell me as if I didn't know what it was, like, what is astrology?
Good question. I think the one of the difficulties with that is it's so many different things for so many different people.
Okay.
At its basis, like the core claim of it is that it's trying to find correlations or correspondences between the movements of the planets, which also includes the sun and the moon, and in contemporary astrology, asteroids and bodies like Pluto that are technically now considered dwarf planets, and trying to find correspondences between them and events on Earth and people's lives. So particularly this is, everyone knows their sun sign, but that's the zodiac sign that the sun was in at the moment you were born. And there are, again, many different forms of astrology, but globally, completely different forms. But the Western astrology that we know is really based around the kind of combination of the zodiac signs, which is a division of the sky into 12 equal chunks, the planets that are in those, and from the perspective of Earth, they appear to be slowly moving around those zodiac signs. Also included in this is the aspects, as they're called, or the angles between the different planets, and also the houses, which are divisions of that zodiac based on the horizon, essentially.
Wow.
Which is when it starts to get increasingly, on the one hand, complicated in terms of technical skill, but also where the real kind of beauty of it and the reason why I find it so interesting is, which is it's based around just staring at the sky. And it's like, if you were born at a particular moment and you were to look at the sky, that is the birth chart around you. So when you look at a birth chart, which we'll get to in a second, I imagine, that's a visual representation of if you went outside from the hospital or wherever when you were born, that's what you would have seen. You would have seen the sun there, the moon there, Venus there.
That's so cool.
And it's then about interpreting those.
I'm kind of taken back from that response. That was such a beautiful answer. Like,
thank you.
What is so how long have you been like getting into this? Like, how long have you been doing astrology, whether that's in academic practice or whether that's just you on your own?
Personally, yeah. It was a kind of strange journey. So I've been doing anthropology for as long as I can remember at this point, because I don't remember much anymore. I did my undergrad in it. I did my master's degree in it. And I was very much intending on doing a PhD and studying mental health. So I had in my head a very clear goal of I want to go into a psychiatric ward and spend a year doing research there. I then start applying for my PhD. My would-be supervisor was saying, that's fantastic, great idea, but it's going to be really, really hard to do. It's going to be hard to get ethical approval for it. It's going to be a very tough year. And she said, is there anything else you're interested in that you could do instead? And it took me a while to think about it, but I just offhandedly said, well, mysticism and religion and those kind of really heartfelt experiences, which to me is why I was interested in mental health in the first place, because I was interested in those kind of really personal stories and those really inner experiences. And religion is also based around those kind of moments of wonder, those moments of awe. And my supervisor then said, kind of offhandedly, oh, well, I've seen around Liverpool loads of signs for things like psychic readings. You could research New Age stuff because very few people have done that. And I started then just reading more and more, and as soon as I opened the floodgates, it basically all came out.
Oh, amazing.
Like, all my friends are into astrology. It's so popular these days. And that was about early 2018. So I've been, I would say, doing it personally since late 2018 when I started my research, and I was kind of trying to immerse myself in it, and it's just stuck with me ever since.
Oh, I love that. Sorry, I'm just literally just like sitting here like listening to you like, oh, that's so interesting.
Thank you.
Oh, what
I've got a very, very strange job.
Yeah, but it must be such a cool job as well, because you're exploring different sides of yourself. Like, that's another reason why I wanted to start DM Talks, is because I honestly wholeheartedly believe that we all just want to be seen in our entirety. However, we're all multifaceted people. So I like astrology because it allows us to explore those different facets of ourselves. And in time, we meet other like-minded individuals that we're able to sort of like sort of evolve together and like what we've learned, or we can also learn what we dislike from one another, but in like a respectful yet challenging way, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that this podcast is a really good space for that. And astrology itself, I think, is a really good crystallization of all those themes, because it is very much about, so going back to the birth chart idea, the reason why that moment of like going outside and looking at the planets is so important, because the core philosophical claim almost is that the position of the planets when something begins can tell you something about that thing itself. So most of us know this as people in terms of the birth chart when someone's born, but it can also be applied to businesses or objects or buildings or ships.
Could you give us an example of like one that you know?
Baghdad.
Okay.
Baghdad, the city, was founded based on astrological principles. There was a particular time chosen. Yep.
Mad.
I don't have the date on me. I've got it in a book somewhere. But yeah, it was because astrology itself started in Mesopotamia. And its very core principles about 4,000 years ago, when people started observing the sky, particularly eclipses, and making very general observations of, okay, when there's an eclipse, basically something bad happens, often to the king. And this then very slowly evolved. So Mesopotamia then had the zodiac develop, and by about 410, 500 BCE, you start to have people writing down what we would now consider birth charts, like when the planets when someone was born. And the zodiac signs are developed then. Then there's a really weird character that we know nothing about, but apparently there was a guy called Berossus who went to the island of Kos. This was like 280 BCE. He was a Mesopotamian who went to the island of Kos that was Greek-speaking under Greek rule and brought that astrology there. And then within a few generations, you have what we now recognize as astrology with an ascendant, a rising sign. You've got the MC, you've got houses, you've got aspects. And it just sort of grew suddenly in Greece and then travelled on to, and this is getting to Baghdad now, it travelled very quickly to the Persian world. And these texts got translated into Persian, so modern day Iraq, Iran, Syria, and then translated into Arabic. And it was huge in the Islamic world for around a millennia before it got translated back into Latin. That was a very hasty summary, but basically, yeah.
It's so cool.
The path is Mesopotamia, Greece, Islamic world, Latin world.
It's so interesting because the thing is, like, if you don't know much about astrology, you know, like your sun sign is from the day that you're born, so you don't really know the history of it. So that's why I like talking to you, because I'm able to learn like so many different aspects of it and learn how technical it can be. Could you actually give us a bit of a crash course on what are they called? So you know how you have your sun, moon, and your rising. What are they actually called?
Yes.
Like if you group them together.
So people called those three specifically the big three, because they're kind of the most important points, essentially. Deciding what is important and isn't important in a chart can be quite a difficult thing in itself.
Well, it could be quite
theoretically, every point is important.
Yeah, but it could be subjective as well. Like,
exactly.
So, like, let's say if you really, so let's say my Venus is in Pisces, and Venus is the planet that rules your love. Correct me if I'm wrong, or the correct way.
You are.
Oh
right.
yeah. Oh right. Venus is the planet that you that controls how you love and controls how you feel, like on an emotional, social level. Yeah. So the fact that my Venus is in Pisces means that I'm very sensitive. It means that I really appreciate nurturement, and it means that I'm like part of the water element. So that's now associated with sort of different aspects of that said element, you know.
Yeah.
So what's for the listeners who don't know, what is a birth chart? How could they get one done? And could you tell them like what moon and rising are?
Yeah, so I've gone from trying to give a general description to Mesopotamia very quickly. So going back to the basics of what it is, you take the time you were born, ideally as precise as you can. Most people can only really get it within 5 minutes or so. That's kind of good enough. And that combined with where you are, again, is then used to generate a map of the heavens at that moment. So websites like astro.com, that's astro.com, have a free birth chart generator where you can put this information in. So what time you were born and where you were born and the dates, obviously. Then creates this kind of circular map that represents what would actually be if you looked up just a bunch of stars and points. So that map is then, if you're looking at it as a circle, you've kind of got a division down the middle. That's the ascendant, so to speak. That's the horizon. And on the left side of that circular chart, which is the east, if you were stood looking at the sky outside, that's what people call the rising sign. And the zodiac sign that horizon is in, so the sign that was just rising above the horizon when you were born, is taken to be, in classical astrology, that's kind of the most sensitive point, because the part that changes the fastest. So that sign is kind of the overall ruler of the person's life. You then have the sun and the moon, which are, again, the zodiac sign that the sun was in and the moon was in at the moment you were born. All the planets move at different speeds, so the moon moves very quickly, so it can change. So it changes signs every 2 or so days, so it can change quite quickly, whereas the sun takes about a month to go through. But the planets all move slowly through these signs. So you then have, when you get a full birth chart, you've got those three that everyone talks about, but you've also got, like you said, you've got Venus, you've got Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. People might throw in other points like Chiron, a centaur like thing in the Kuiper belt, stuff like that. You can really add a lot of information to it to kind of draw out those stories.
Oh, amazing.
And yeah, so broadly speaking then, the ascendant is often said to be, so the ascendant is that rising sign. It's often said in popular astrology to be how you appear to the outside world. It's kind of you and the body and who you are at its kind of most core level, not in the sort of soul sense of your inner essence, but in that sense of like how you act and think in the world and how you come across to people. The moon is then taken to be the emotions and the body, but the body not in the sense of health or well-being per se, but in the sense of those deeply felt emotions that you have and those kind of bodily feelings when things happen, those instinctual responses. The sun is then a lot of very different connotations to it, but often the sense of identity. So this is why people often identify with the descriptions of the zodiac sign that their sun is in. So I'm an Aries.
Aries
gang! My sun was in Aries.
Gang.
We're both Aries. So that idea of like starting cardinal, like fire energy that's just going, like it's taking all of my effort right now to not start speaking really quickly. And that's a really good example of Aries energy where it's just doing
so fast. I think
things.
that's why we vibe off each other so much, like because we're both Aries. Like we'll be talking over each other, but we both also like can listen to what each other are saying, but we're just so used to that full force,
very
immediate
active.
Action, like fast fire.
Yeah. And so each of those signs then, you have all of those signs, all of the 12 signs, so Aries through to Pisces, are in your birth charts. You might not have planets in all of them, in fact you probably won't, and you might not have key points in all of them, but they all play a role. And so that's one of the issues you get to when a lot of people say they don't really identify with their sun sign, is a lot of popular astrology has this idea that you are a sign and that is you, whereas when you look at a full birth chart, it goes back to what you were saying, it's very, very fragmented. It's lots of very different things, and they don't all necessarily relate to you all the time. So I'm a Gemini rising, so that would imply I move my arms a lot, I'm talkative, I'm all over the place. But also Mercury, the planet that rules communication, so related to Gemini, is in Taurus, which is a very slow planet.
Yeah, it's very grounded, isn't it? Like very earth-based, very grounded, very like level-headed, if anything. Well, not level-headed, it's the bull, isn't it?
Yeah, grounded, but can be quite, when it wants to do something, it does it.
Like stubborn, I guess.
Yes, yeah. And you then have, it's difficult to run through all the points quickly, but the big three, again, the rising, the sun, and the moon, are kind of what will often be pulled out. And particularly are using, again, that popular astrology.
Yeah.
I keep saying popular, by the way. I don't want to sound disparaging. There's kind of, you can go increasingly ridiculous with astrology, down to all kinds of very precise techniques that are timing based, or through to psychological techniques that dig out your relationship with your mother and things like that. And you don't necessarily need to do all of those. Those techniques aren't for everyone. So it's perfectly fine to take your big three and take what you need from that psychologically and for your growth.
I think it's like, because those three, I guess, because there's so much to astrology, like there is literally so much to astrology. I guess like the fact that people sort of rely on the big three gives just like an insight to what mainstream astrology offers. So like, let's say when I started learning more about astrology and then I realized, wow, there is so much. I started just on like a basic level. I just would only, so let's say, you know, when you read your horoscope, I'll read my sun, moon, and my rising horoscopes. So then I get a bit of a rounded picture, you know? But honestly, like, people who study astrology, you included, I'm just like, wow, like, I'm amazed. Like, so much to read about, so many things to... And it's when you do your birth chart and then you see, like, this planet was in this ratio to this thing, so that means this, and you're like, wait, what? Like, it's just like, how did we get here?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like I say, it's easy to think that it's this kind of new thing, but it's been around for 2,000 years.
Yeah.
In just the form we know it, and that's just the tradition that we have in the contemporary Anglosphere West. Like, India has its own tradition, China does, Japan does.
Yeah.
The Mayans had their own completely separate idea of what astrology was. There's all these different ways of looking at the stars and the planets, and I think one of the reasons it does appeal to me personally is because it is, or it can be, quite booky and quite heady, and quite technical, and that I go down that route by reading all kinds of bizarre translations of stuff from the Middle Ages. But I'd be doing that, I think, anyway, even if I wasn't into it. And I think one thing I would say is it's easy to kind of get disparaged, and this doesn't just apply to astrology. This applies to all spiritual things. Like, say you started doing mindfulness practice, and then you start reading about Buddhism, and then you realize, oh, there are loads of Sanskrit texts out there that haven't even been translated. Like, you could either one response to that is to try and learn Sanskrit. One response to that is to quit completely. But the kind of practical response is just to learn what you can when you can and take what is useful for you.
100%. It's mad that you say that, because wait, bear with me. I'm just reaching to grab something. Ooh. Everything's falling. So basically, it's funny how you say that, because I got gifted this book for my birthday from my beautiful friend Tilly. Shout out Tilly if you hear this. It's called The Tower of Pooh and the Tale of Piglet. We were in this bookstore, this esoteric bookstore in called Watkins in London. It's absolutely beautiful. Like, I've been able to get so many of my bits like from there. And essentially this book, if you don't know anything about it, is based on Taoism, and that's an Eastern philosophy that's used to promote like sort of mindfulness, the sense of being, stillness, serenity, sort of acceptance. And so I don't want to like speak too much about it, because I don't feel like I know enough to sort of comment on it. However, what this book has provided me is sort of relatable and easy language to sort of understand it. The scripture I think that Taoism based from is called Tao Si Ching. I'm not too sure.
Yeah, you're right. Tao Te Ching.
There you go.
I can't pronounce it either. So don't worry.
And basically, there's so many interpretations of this scripture. However, this book, Benjamin Hoff, has able to interpret the book, but with principles from Winnie the Pooh and Piglet. And it's really amazing, because you're able to sort of provide sort of foundational knowledge to incite, like, I don't know, inside your faith, inside like sort of that, you know, that childhood curiosity, that like excitedness to learn. Like, it's able to sort of giving me the building blocks to be like, oh, now I can go and do this with this information, and I don't feel as like less confident. Like, I'm not gonna be like, oh no, I'm gonna put this aside. I'm actually gonna stick with it.
Yeah. I mean, exactly. Like, if you were to just go to a library and pull out a translation of Taoist scriptures from whatever century,
Yeah.
it's going to completely overwhelm you.
Yeah.
You have to start somewhere. And I think that it is a difficult thing to balance, particularly with religions that are, I'm saying this actually specifically as a white person. I think we should clarify for people who only have the audio, like I'm a white man. And so I think that I am particularly careful to not claim to be an authority on things I am not an authority on. However, that doesn't mean that you can't read, not even just reading the Tao of Pooh, but also you can't read, it means that you can read like the Tao Te Ching and take stuff from it really easily, regardless of where you're coming from, and incorporate it into your own practice and thought. There's no actual boundary there. Yeah, and I think that goes back to how easy it is to get overwhelmed with things, and it can be, particularly when you're on very much a kind of, for lack of a better way of phrasing it, a spiritual journey. You're coming across new things constantly, and yes, you can stop and pause at one particular thing and go as deep into it as you can, but that might take 2-3 years, and it might be that then you come out of that and great, you're an expert on Taoism, but actually round the corner from that is something else that you find next that hits you even more. So that exploration is really important. And going back to astrology, the ability, the fact that you can just go online and cast a birth chart, something that people couldn't do. I mean, you had to do it by hand for 2,000 years.
Yeah, that's mad.
And it was only
Think
in the
about it that way.
Yeah. And going back to the Middle Ages, like, people often didn't actually know the time they were born at all. So now it's way easier to get this information, and the fact that's available there, you can access it, take what you need, you can read online blogs, you can follow astrologers on the internet. You don't need to be reading necessarily stuff from the pre-modern period or be reading stuff from the 20th century to get that full rounded approach.
And I could imagine, was it like, obviously we're talking about accessibility now, that's great, especially with our like technological advancements, but I can imagine that it could have been something of like a higher class, like maybe you wouldn't have been able to access this sort of resource depending on who you were in society, you know?
In short, yes. The access to astrologers was fairly easy, but access to astrology itself was very restricted. All the texts were, so if we're talking here, like, I'm thinking here kind of like late Middle Ages Europe, so 1300s onwards, all the texts were in Latin. You had to be educated. They weren't in the common tongue. You had to, I said a very Game of Thrones like common tongue.
It doesn't sound like that.
Wow. So in order to learn astrology to the level we do now was very, very intensive, and you had to be well off. I actually have behind me, one second.
Ooh, I'm excited to what you're going to show us. Yes.
Well, I know it's underneath me. Right, excited for this one. This is William Lilly's Christian Astrology.
Okay.
From 1647. This was the first astrology textbook written in English. I'm giving you a whole crash course now. I'm going deep, don't worry. Yeah. It took until the 1600s before an average guy could read and learn about astrology in that level, basically.
Mad.
Yeah. And it's also only ironically recently that book has been republished. It took until the 1980s. So it kind of came full circle, disappeared for a bit. But yeah, you could go to an astrologer fairly easily, and it was fairly common. But if you were super poor or lived very rural, it was difficult.
Oh, amazing. Well, so
that was a whole dive.
No, but like, I'm learning so much, because that's the thing. Like, actually, no, this is a great moment to take it into decoding the messes. So, decoding
please.
the messes is the segment where we sort of want to talk about something that we want to unpack, whether it's something that we see online or offline. Maybe it's something that's annoyed us, whatever. One of my sort of questions for you, because we're talking about astrology, and we see how astrology can be misperceived to be very like airy-fairy, like rose-tinted glasses, especially in the association with romance. And I wanted to ask you about your particular feelings behind this, because when we think of astrology, when people, I guess, think of astrology, they may think, oh, that guy that I fancy or that person that I fancy is a Taurus. Oh, let's do a compatibility and find out what we're like. And I mean, I'm including myself in this. I feel complete like.
Oh, I'm very guilty. Yeah, no, I'm
guilty.
also, I've done that countless times. Yeah.
Like literally, like honestly, I'm the worst. Like, so I wanted to ask you about this for the audience, but particularly for myself because I want to feel challenged. Like, I want to know why.
Yeah. I think that it's very easy to do, and I feel like especially if you've, like many people have, if you've had that immersion in astrology and you've found that it's been really powerful for you, and you've understood your own chart or you've understood your sun sign and your moon sign, it can be tempting to take other people's, quite, to put it bluntly, surface level astrological information like their sun sign or moon sign
and run with
try
it.
and use that to and to try and use that as a kind of starting point, often very, very early on in a relationship. And when I say very early, I mean sometimes it's just someone you fancy on Instagram. It's not even a relationship.
Literally, drag me.
Yeah. Oh, again, guilty. It is a strange one, and I feel like if people, again, myself included, weren't using astrology for this, they would be using something else.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can always find a stereotype to put it in of like, oh, you know, they've got such and such a piercing, I like that, we'll go for that kind of thing. And so I don't blame people who use compatibility.
Sorry, bear with me. Someone's ringing me. Wow, that was awful.
I can hear it.
Oh
here.
my god. Sorry, let me reply to him. Amazing. So you just said I got sort of similar themes of you talking about how if you've got someone with like astrology practice and then you're seeing someone with surface level, you want to sort of take them on and teach them your way as well. However, that's something sort of relatable to sort of allowing people to be okay on their journey. Do you know what I mean? Like,
exactly.
my mum always used to say to me, everyone's learning the same thing. We all take different routes learning it. Right. This is applicable to loads of various things. However, in regards to astrology, it's like, look, I'm doing my own thing. I'm participating in my own practice. If you want to join me, that's fine. However, that's not something that should be forced upon you. You know? Yeah. And I think maybe that sort of sense of conflict also adds to the undermining of the practice. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, people often very much look at the outside. They'll look at astrology from the outside and they'll say, okay, so you've been spending thousands of years now arguing about house division issues and which zodiac is correct. Then why should we take this seriously at all?
Mm-hmm.
And when there's a lot of infighting like that in any spiritual group, it can make it appear less legitimate to outsiders.
Yeah.
Speaking that almost like as an anthropologist, I'd say, which I think is a shame. And going back to what you said about different paths there, my favourite phrase on that is Ram Dass, who said, we're all just walking each other home.
Aww.
And I quite like that one, quite wholesome.
Yeah, it's very comforting. It's very warming.
And so I think that there is a tension in astrology, but also all spiritual practices, of maintaining that boundary of saying to people, hey, look, this use of it isn't necessarily very productive. So saying like, okay, it is a bit of fun to look at sun sign compatibility. I'm an Aries, you're a Taurus. How are we going to get on? But at the end of the day, that isn't the same as a full synastry reading or looking at your natal chart in itself, which is kind of the most important thing, and understanding what that says about relationships for you.
Yeah.
You can add in the compatibility. And I feel like one way I often see it used, in a way that's quite funny, is like after a breakup, it's like, oh, well, he was a Virgo, so, you know, screw it.
But don't you...
you get things like that.
But don't you think, like, I guess something that frustrates me, I guess, not necessarily just with astrology, but like that sort of limiting belief of someone or said thing. So like, let's say if someone relies... So me for example, right? I'm a loud character. I'm quite... I get excited very easily. Like I'm like a fire through and through. However, I'm not going to blame my impatience on my Aries placement.
Yeah.
And I think that's very annoying when people do that. I'm just like, stop. Like, Aries doesn't mean that you're a dickhead. I mean, it means that you're a higher chance of being. However, like there is choice at the end of the day. There's a choice in how we take these sort of descriptions of our related characters. It was mad because so the Sunflower, this influencer that I follow, she basically is really into astrology as well, and she's basically said how when she does her like a birth chart reading and whatever, it's able to give her sort of areas of where to go more inwards. So let's say she is a Gemini, and Geminis don't like this this characteristic or whatever, or that sort of self-awareness to her in her own space at home when she's doing her reading, that she doesn't have to learn externally. So it's quite like an intimate sort of relationship that you're able to develop with yourself, which I like.
Yeah, that goes back to, I think, the core of what astrology is, which is to remember that it's easy to get caught up in it as an object, but at the end of the day, it's humans doing this. It's us sitting down in front of a piece of paper or a laptop looking at it. And it's talking about, like, Aries placements and things. It was only, I mean, quite late in the development of astrology that it was even suggested that this stuff might be permanent or causal. Like, it was always taken as omens. There were signs. There were abstract symbols that were just corresponded to things on Earth. They didn't cause it. I mean, specifically Ptolemy in the 2nd century, I want to say, kind of made the causal model popular, the idea that Mars in a certain position heated certain areas of the Earth and all sorts of stuff. But from Mesopotamia through to ancient Greece, through to the Arabic world, it wasn't about absolutism. It was about, okay, here's indications in the sky that tell you something about yourself. And it's the way I like to think of it is it's another perspective on your life. And you can take from that what you want. You can have a conversation with it. You can sit there with your chart, you can learn from it, and you can disagree with it. Just like a friend, you can just kind of be like, well, actually, I'm going to ignore that bit because I don't think you're right there. And you may come around to it 2 years later and think, oh God, that was completely correct. But it is a human action. And when you're sat there looking at your chart, reading blogs online, following astrologers, as important as getting it right is making sure that it is being helpful. And I think that then goes back to the compatibility thing, which is that after a point it stops being helpful. It starts being a hindrance. It starts preventing you from seeing relationships very, very clearly, because it can very easily become a totalizing way of viewing how you connect to people. And again, there are many, many, many great uses for astrology in relationships. But the starting point, I would firstly always say, is in your own birth chart. So looking at your birth chart, looking at your Venus placement, your moon placement, your 7th house, just throwing that out there to Google, looking at those can tell you a lot about how you relate to relationships, how you think about relationships. And once you know that, you don't really need to know what the other person's sign is. Like, my Venus is in Gemini, I tend to have really great relationships with people who are talkative, and relationships with people that are based around talking and communication. That's a very standard Venus in Gemini textbook definition. And I don't need to know whether the other person's a Gemini or not to get if that's going to work or not. I just need to talk to them for a bit and figure it out. And I think that the issue I have with that direct, simple compatibility is also, again, the problem of looking it up, if that makes sense. Because it's often a case of going to an external source, and many of these compatibility guides assume heterosexuality. They assume it's a man and a woman, they assume it's monogamous, and they assume the goal is long-term stable marriage. Whereas for many people, it's something completely different from that. It might be queer, it might be temporary, it might be something that's just sexual, it might be something that is just romantic and not sexual, asexuality, that kind of thing. And I do want to give a shout out here to a book, Annabelle Gatt. Where is it? The Astrology of Love and Sex. It's essentially a sign compatibility book, but it goes one step further than most. That's by Annabelle Gatt, who is also the astrologer at Vice, which is a great sentence to say out loud. She wrote a compatibility book that I would recommend if you're getting into relationship astrology, because that takes you beyond the he's a Taurus, I'm an Aries, through to, okay, how do these signs actually interact in practice? And from there on, you can start trying to go deeper. And I think what I would also say, just final kind of point before I take a breath, again, Gemini rising, there we go, just saying about blaming things on placement. But one final thing I would say is that, yeah, you don't necessarily need to go into every practice you come across, but if you find yourself using astrology to that point where you are talking about compatibility, clearly it's sunk its claws into you. And at that point, you may as well try and go deeper. You may as well invest some time in it, may as well get some books, may as well follow some YouTubers, listen to some podcasts, and go deep into it, because you're clearly spending a lot of time with it anyway. So why not challenge yourself beyond that and see how astrology can challenge you?
Oh my God, that is sick. Sorry, I'm there learning so much from you. Like, I knew this episode was going to be good, but I didn't know it was going to be this good. I was like, wow.
Thank you.
Oh my God. Oh my goodness.
Cheers.
So no, let me just ask you some more questions.
No, just hit me.
So I've noticed, obviously, as well how there's just been I have noticed that there's been a lot more people looking towards astrology as a way of implementing faith. Why do you think that upsurge occurred? Like, what do you think's promoted it?
I still don't know, actually, because you're absolutely right, and like astrologers in the community talk about this. There was like a few years ago, 2016ish, 2017, there was an upsurge in kind of also things like witchcraft. Kind of very accessible.
Various forms of
really
divination.
Yeah, divination and esotericism and magic and stuff like that became almost suddenly quite popular. And I've never quite figured out why. I've seen astrologers, for what it's worth, put it on Neptune going into Pisces. But it's still quite vague to me. The thing I will say though is that it's clear that it's a quite a new wave of it. It's a lot of young people, and it's a lot of women, and it's a lot of queer people. Who are at the front of it. There was I'm not going to go into too many details now because I don't want to kind of call people out, but there was a very, very strange argument on astrology Twitter a few months ago where someone, this is again going to like deep astrology, but someone said that there's this idea called essential dignities, which is that planets in certain signs basically do better in certain signs than others. Like they like being in certain signs. Okay. And an astrologer who didn't like this said that it was heteronormative and gave a kind of general description of why he thought that, and it was an argument that was had. And what you then had was a large amount of people who use that doctrine, who talk about essential dignities and use it in chart readings, were then saying, actually, no, I'm queer and I find this helps me in this way and that way. And so what you see is that there's this new wave of astrology is people going really deep. Like people are now reading translations of like ancient Greek texts, and they're reading Indian texts, and there's people writing new stuff all the time, and there's loads of podcasts, and we're like finding new ideas. I say we now, like we're finding new ideas in this community all the time, and it is led by a lot of very young people who are very, very quite progressive.
Yeah, no, definitely.
I don't know what the cause is, but it's quite, I feel like on the scale of waves of esotericism and spirituality, it's on the more positive end. It's definitely more positive than like a bunch of like Aleister Crowley and all the middle class people in the early 20th century, I would say. No,
because I've noticed that like even the use of astrology and crystals, like crystal work and like tarot, even though I've only been practicing for maybe like a year and a half so now, like over the past 6 months even, the amount of people that I've met who are doing this compared to the people that I met when I first like started my practice, like it's insane. Like everybody's getting into it, and I'm like loving how sort of faith is prevailing, you know, like how it's like rising.
Yeah. There's a definite sea change going on. I mean, I've noticed it in academia as well. Like I naively came back from my fieldwork assuming that when I continue to talk about astrology on my Twitter feed and such, and continue to kind of do it.
Yeah.
I assumed other academics would be a bit put off by it,
Yeah.
but I've had people quietly come and ask me to do a reading with them.
Oh.
Like, it's hitting all kinds of different strata of society.
Yeah.
And I think, in fact, I'm going to bounce this back to you. Like, when you say faith, what do you mean there?
When I say faith, I think of something that I can find within me, but also I know is around me, whether that's in nature, whether that's people that I've met, whether that's like seeing synchronicities. Like, literally the other day I saw 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 4, 7 sevens, right? 7 sevens, 2, 3, 4.
I don't know how you'd get that.
Like, how? Honestly, like, they're everywhere. And it's really uplifting, but also it's a reminder that in faith, and it's a reminder that I'm being looked after and I'm not alone. You know, and I think...
And that is...
No, you go on.
Oh, well, that is one of the kind of messages of astrology, which is that if there are these kind of... I really like the word omen because it sounds so foreboding. Ooh. But if there are these kind of like omens and these signs in the universe, it implies that they're coming from somewhere, or that there's some kind of regularity or order. And I think like there will be people listening to this and watching this who are astrology skeptical, and just inviting them into the conversation a bit, I would say that astrology is a very, very... It's like a raw shot in the arm of that kind of holistic thought. Yeah. It's like an immediate injection of everything is connected. Okay. But you don't necessarily need to believe in astrology to still see how that's a beneficial point of view.
100%.
Like
100%.
Connecting, like we are in a... This is kind of where my thesis is almost going to go for my PhD. Ooh. Like for the... kind of impressive. But the contemporary kind of modern paradigm we have, as amazing as it has been in curing all sorts of diseases and such, it is based around separation, and it's based around human here, nature below it. And astrology, divination, crystals, like, regardless of how far you take all of those practices or just some of them, is they're really representative of that kind of really holistic human thought that we need. We need a form of it. It doesn't have to be astrological, but we need some element of, like you say, faith, like the idea that there are connections between things and people that are, to a degree, things that you almost can't see. That kind of like resonance between things.
No, definitely. Like earlier when you were just saying how you sort of went along the theme about how it's like a tool for you, and like I find that mad because I always literally use that to describe tarot. Like, even if you don't resonate with spirituality and this form of divination, you can literally I can literally give you a card and that will give you different perspectives of a description. Those different perspectives can now lead you into different experiences, because now you're like, oh, I see this differently, you know. And I think that's something that's really like really calming, and really like you can be really receptive of that information. Like, I remember when I first started learning about the cards and stuff, and I'm sure I've spoken this sorry, I can't speak, and I'm sure I've spoken about this before. However, so you've got your swords, your pentacles, your wands, and your cups, right? So cups, wands, and swords, they're all to do with fire.
Wands fire, cups water, swords air, and pentacles
there
earth.
You go. So you've got your fire, air, and your water resonating with these aspects that how you can deal with your life inwards, whether that's how you're emotionally feeling, how it's your mental capability, how your motivation to get up in the morning, but how are those elements being implemented outside of that? So it's like all the work that you do inwards, it still needs to be reflected outside, and that's when it comes into pentacles, and you can use it, sort of manifest into like not even manifest, but materialize into some physical, onto the physical plane, that now I can do stuff with it, which I find really like comforting.
Tarot is a really good comparison because it's another form of very like direct symbolic divination. And I think I always try and emphasize these things as tools.
Yes.
If I have to go a bit further than that, I might describe them as an art, but I'll start with tool, because there's almost a point where it doesn't really... I'm talking here about correspondences and faith and mysterious clockwork of the universe, but there's almost a point where that is secondary to, can you look at your birth chart or have someone look at your birth chart with you, a professional astrology reading, and sit with it for an hour and come away from it being able to make better decisions and being able to feel better about yourself and move on. And the word perspective you used, I think, is really, really powerful there. That word to me has a very specific, weird kind of correspondence, which is in anthropology. We use the word perspectivism to describe a particular kind of shamanism.
Okay.
Where this is in South America, like along the Amazon. There's a few different groups that do it, but where you go into a trance state and then you inhabit the form of an animal, and you then use that to gain a different, literally, perspective on what's going on, and that everything around you has a kind of perspective it can offer to you. And so I like seeing astrology as a kind of perspective on your life. It's something you can access, and you say, okay, this is what's going on for me right now. I'm having a relationship issue. You can look at your Venus, you can look at the position of Venus in the sky, you can look at your 7th house, which is the zodiac sign opposite your ascendant, for reference, and you can look at those and have almost a conversation with it, your conversation with you in English or whatever language you prefer to speak, and that kind of strange cosmic language of the symbols of the stars. And that is where the production lies. That is where you come to new conclusions. And if getting that new perspective is helpful, then it's helpful. And if it's not helpful, or if reading too many books in order to keep going deep in that perspective isn't what you're able or willing to do right now, then hey, you can drop it and go to tarot, or go to meditation, or go to talking to a friend. You can do all kinds of different perspectives. But to me, it is a tool, and I think it's about getting what you can from it when you need it.
Matt, oh mate, that's beautiful. Like, I'm literally just listening to everything and I'm like, you're amazing. As you were talking,
Thank you.
I had, because you kept on talking about your 7th house, and I was like, I need to see what my 7th house is. I've just found out that my 7th house is in Leo.
Yep,
And
it's Leo.
I'm also
right with your moon there.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So what does that mean?
So Leo is ruled by the sun.
Yes.
So the first thing you would do is see where the sun is. The sun's out. That's the one benefit of doing this at our homes, is you can just have the window right there. Yeah. So I've actually just pulled up your chart in front of me now, because
you have my chart with me. Amazing.
Yeah, you gave it to me a while ago.
Amazing.
So when you're looking at a house, so one of these areas, so you've got 12 of them. The 7th is relationships, the 1st is the rising sign, and then they all mean subtly different things. So the 4th, for example, is home, the 10th is career, but 7th is where we're going now with relationships. One of the main things you look at is, what's the sign on the cusp of the house? So in this case, Leo. What are the planets in the house? So the moon in this case. And then where is the planet that rules that zodiac sign? That's a bit of a slightly abstract concept, but each of the signs is said to be ruled by a planet. So for example, Aries, is ruled by Mars. So looking at Leo now, wherever the sun is in your birth chart will relate to relationships for you. So you've got the sun in Aries. We know you're in Aries, right by Saturn in your third house of communication, also of short-term travel and neighbours. That would relate, if you're talking about what you would then, I'm just going to do a reading now.
Yeah, no, mate, I love it. Yeah, let's go into it. Why not? Oh my God, we're getting everything in this podcast. We're getting history, we're getting interpretations. Oh, I'm here for it. I'm here for it.
This will be quite shaky as we go through, but I'll try and see what I can say. So the sun is then kind of representing you in relationships. So you have Leo on that 7th house, but Aries is, you would almost act Aresian in a relationship.
Okay.
Like that kind of cardinal starting energy would be there. That is, I would say, balanced by the Leo, in Leo being a fixed sign. So Leos can stick through. There is a sense of commitment to that.
Okay.
So Leo, I mean, simply put, with the moon there as well, is actually that's a really good.
It's quite intense,
position,
I
would
thought,
say.
as well, because I feel like with Leo, it talks about well, I'm thinking of the the strength card that it's also associated with in tarot. It's power, it's strong, but it also has the lion next to it. In the Rider-Waite deck, the mouth is open, so you've got to see this figure sort of trying to close the mouth of this like huge lion, and it's sort of resembling your shadow self, like maybe having the potential to be taken over you and whatnot.
Yes.
But when I see so Leo moon in general is very like well, I'll let you speak. It's more like sort of you alone is very personal to you, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. And it's like looking at that loyalty, I would say, is kind of a key theme. Also, because you were born at night, so the sun was underneath the horizon, the moon is particularly important in your chart. Probably more so than the sun.
That's
even.
what, yeah.
So having that there's a huge focus on relationships in your life. And when I say relationships here, the 7th house is romantic relationships, but it's also any one-to-one connection. Like it's even business partnerships.
Oh man.
It's that long-term. I don't want to say stable necessarily, but it's about the long-term connections you make with individual people. And I would say that would then be that kind of focus will be channeled through where the sun is, so channeled into communication in the 3rd house, and often a kind of very start-stop energy. I mean, the sun is exalted in Aries, it does great in Aries. This is, in very simple terms, this is very positive. You also have Saturn next to the sun there, and next to Mercury, which emphasizes the communication aspect.
Babe, this is so cool. Oh my God, you're literally, I'm going to note down every single book that you've mentioned today and go off and do it more reading, because you've now like prompted something within me, because oh God, we're learning everything today.
Thank you.
Oh, it's amazing. Oh my goodness. It's actually amazing actually, because we I think this is a great time to take us into tarot talks.
Yeah, let's go.
So I'm really, really lucky today, and all of the listeners are too. Tom here is going to do us a tarot reading for us. Amazing.
Hey, if there was an audience, they'd be clapping, I'm sure.
I'm clapping in
Thank
spirit.
you, Sarah. Thank you.
So yeah, Tarot Talks is just the segment where we do a little tarot reading for the collective. Tom has been practicing tarot. For how long have you been practicing tarot?
Around the same length as astrology.
Okay.
I'd say, yeah. So approaching 2 years.
Approaching 2 years, amazing.
And I just,
I just thought I'd let you give a tarot reading today, because I think it'd be quite nice for a different change, a different perspective, a different viewpoint on how we can navigate life, and as we talk to spirit. Is there any questions that you've been thinking of that you want to ask spirit today?
Not at this point, and I feel like that's strange, because I feel like there's so many people are so uncertain now. But I've now finally got my quarantine routine sorted.
Oh yeah.
I'm feeling quite stable enough. I think what I'll go for is a question that Ella, actually, who was on your last podcast,
shout out to
actually
Ella,
asked recently. Yeah, which is shout out to Ella. Which is what is my life going to look like after quarantine? Or I say what is life going to look like after quarantine?
Ooh, I'm excited for that one.
It's a very bold one.
That is a bold question.
Almost a bit predictive. I feel like a sense of like, when, because we don't know when we're going to leave this.
Yeah, we don't know when.
We don't know when we're going to be, and I think that rather than focusing on when are we going to leave, I feel like if we just find what some positives of getting out will actually be
100%.
something to focus on. Yeah.
I'm happy with that question.
Yeah. And before we start, just showing the camera, I'm using the Hermetic Tarot deck, which is a very dramatic sounding name.
Beautiful. I love the red around the edges.
This box is gorgeous, yeah. So sticking with the astrology theme, all the cards are black and white, and they all directly contain the astrological symbolism on them. So sorry, I've got 2 different cameras, sorry. No, it's all right. So they are very, very...
I'm dropping things behind you, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
It's all right. No, recording from home.
Recording from home. Yeah. Look at this.
DIY.
Go on, it's like
yeah.
you just see everything. So I'm like, shit. Sorry, go on.
Yeah. No, so I was just saying that this deck, so this has the symbolism that's kind of associated with the tarot cards of the Rider-Waite deck, but made explicit on them. So the actual images are very abstract, but it contains the astrological symbolism. So, for example, Three of Cups here is Mercury in Cancer. It's got the planet and the sign
amazing.
there.
So I should probably just give some information about what we're doing just now. Essentially, because we're staying at home, we've got our Zoom set up. Also, Tom has 2 cameras, so he's able to show the camera what cards they're using and stuff. So if you want to look on YouTube for the episode, then they will be on there.
Please do. Yeah, I mean, they're gorgeous and worth looking at.
Yeah, I'm so excited. Like, Right.
I'm going to go with 3 cards.
3 cards, amazing.
And I'm going to say, specifically, what are the positives? What are the positives going to be in life after quarantine?
Positives.
We're going to make sure this is really happy.
Yes, assertive energy, divine feminine energy. Woo.
Yeah. There we go.
I've been getting really into my tarot practice recently. I actually bought a webinar to sort of finding your feet with tarot by that academic that I mentioned earlier, Leona Cole Black. It's really, really interesting. She talks about froth tarot. She talks about or the different uses of tarot. I actually found out a cool fact. So you know the Rider-Waite deck? So that's just like this deck is probably one of the most popular foundational, like symbolic card decks that you can use.
If you've seen a tarot deck, you've seen
exactly.
That one.
So it was illustrated by a black woman.
Was she black? I
found
that.
I found that 2 days ago.
Wow.
This card deck that's literally been about since 16th century was illustrated. When was it?
That's so Rider-Waite's version was the 1900s. It was jazzing up the version from the 1600s.
Okay. So you know Pamela Coleman Smith. She was a black woman.
That's amazing.
I found that out the other day. I was like, yes, queen.
Yeah, well done. Nice.
I just find
really
it was just really like
shout out to that ancestor.
it was literally really warming because it's like a practice that like so many people use. Was illustrated by a black woman, like that literally just like warmed my heart because like
millions of people have seen her
exactly
images.
And like throughout even to our present day you see a lot of black women their work being erased or manipulated or not being sort of like I guess respected so like to find out that black woman illustrated that deck, props to her. Props to Pamela Coleman Smith.
Yeah. Like that's a worth honoring. Yeah.
How are you getting on there?
I've got the spread out
Amazing.
Ready. Camera's still recording. There we go. Right. So first card, the sun.
The sun.
Talking about astrological symbolism, that's the easiest to figure out. It's the sun. That is raw creativity, the source of life essentially. There's also the kind of the Golden Dawn's own like titles on here. So this is the Sun, Lord of the Fire of the World.
Oh, hello.
Which I think emphasizes that kind of creation aspect of the sun. Then the Queen of Swords.
Okay.
Holding a severed head, which I think has its benefits. And then the Nine of Pentacles. Thankfully for that. So going back to these, the sun, creation. If we're talking about the benefits or the positive aspects of leaving quarantine, I'm seeing that well. I mean, so I don't want to make a timing statement, but we're probably going to get out of here when it's still sunny, summer at some point, and the sun being there, I think that's very, very simple. Like, hey, weather, vitamin D, positivity, that kind of raw shot of energy and buzz that you get from being outside, that benefits from it, as well as the creation aspect of the sun as the kind of source of energy, like where life needs the sun to exist. The sun is kind of that source of energy in life. Queen of Swords next. Wow. I don't think I've ever actually pulled the Queen of Swords
Really?
before with this
It's
deck.
mad.
Yeah.
It's mad how you know how so with Queen of Swords it's a court card, and
Yeah.
I've spoken.
Oh, my camera ran out of
Okay.
battery on the side camera, so we're here with
We're
the
in the
webcam.
webcam.
Hey,
Amazing.
viewers. Yeah. So Queen of Swords.
I was just saying, Queen of Swords.
Mm.
It's a tarot court card, and with tarot court cards, you
Yes.
look for personalities in your life that symbolize these people to you. And when I think of the Queen of Swords,
Yeah.
I think of Kelechi Okafor. I spoke about her actually last week on our feminism episode, and she's very quick talking. She's very witty. She's very powerful. She's very like assertive, but also very like professional. So it's immediately when you've wrote that card, it's like her energy has just like woken me up.
Perfect. Yeah. I think we can go with professionalism then as a symbol for that. If we're talking about going back into the world, that's a sense of like knowing what you're doing straight away. And the astrological symbols on here, it's the court cards rule sections of the zodiac. So the Queen of Swords rules the end of Virgo and then the first 2/3 of Libra. So it's earth and it's balance. It's earth and it's air. It's analytics, and it's also that kind of Libran flair and Venus kind of like having a sense of style about what you're doing. And then Nine of Pentacles, Venus in Virgo. Oh, a lot of Virgo there.
So
actually.
much Virgo.
Yeah, and that's labelled Lord of Material Gain, which I think we could almost leave there as financial doing well, hopefully. Yeah. And going back to again Venus in Virgo, that's it's stable, it's earth. It's stable, and Virgo is mutable, so it's back and forth, it's starting and stopping. So if we're looking at that, it's probably going to be a sense of the finances, whether of people or countries, are going to be bit here, bit there, bit here, bit there, but adding up. And particularly in terms of gain, it's going to be an increasing number.
Oh yay!
I'm always hesitant to get too predictive about that kind of stuff.
No,
but
I completely understand what you mean. Just because
going
like
beyond the psychological, that seems quite beneficial.
No,
to me.
definitely. I like how we've sort of used it as advice, but also like reinstilled that faith, reinstilled that like hope again.
Yeah.
Just because like I know that we're in like everyone say unprecedented times. So like I've kept on feeling quite uneasy, I guess, whether I want to approach various things that I use to make me feel which once made me feel safe. Right now, like, so let's say even doing forms of like tarot during this period, at one point I didn't want to like spiritual bypass the situation, just because like we don't know what's happening right now. Like some people are okay, but some people are grieving, and it's something that you really need to sort of respect and also honor. But then saying that, unless you sort of look outwards, unless you look beyond what's currently sitting in front of us, how are we supposed to grow? How are we supposed to get out of bed in the morning, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And I think the ability this gives you to see beyond your situation is really powerful, particularly for things like anxiety.
Yeah.
Like, it's not helpful when you draw the tower, but just the principle that actually what I'm dealing with now isn't perpetual.
Yes.
It is changeable. It is impermanent. And so okay, I'm stuck in this house, I'm restricted right now, but that's going to change at some point. And being able to accept that. One final pull back to astrology is very, very early astrology in the Greek speaking world was very, very much tied with Stoicism, where the whole point of predicting the future was so that you could accept it, whether it was good or bad. And then when it happened to you, you could be like, hey, great, either thank you, gods, for giving me this, or I don't know why you gave me this, but I'll roll with it anyway.
Well, I guess it's like, and because you have that time to become familiar with what's being provided for you, you're better at accepting it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's how you can kind of connect things like tarot and astrology to mindfulness, in that sense of acceptance, of looking at things in depth and getting that other perspective, going back to that word, like the Nine of Pentacles there, who knows whether it's going to be as literal as, okay, my income as Thomas Sullivan is going to be beneficial and increase overall, but in starts and stops, or whether that's going to manifest as the income I have, whatever that might be after this, can be viewed through the lens of the Nine of Pentacles, and therefore I can view it with this kind of positive Venus light.
You know, like, I'm going to get the Ride Away card up right now.
Yeah.
Because when you see the Nine of Pentacles, it's this woman, and she's actually got the symbol of, is it not Venus, but it's like a, maybe the Virgo symbol? I'm not too sure. She's got that all over her gown, and she's got, like, blooming fruit, just sort of like, well, ready. So it's like she's able to sort of bloom, she's able to take from her harvest, you know, she's able to, she's been, what's that word? I know the word is, sorry, let me rewind. She's wearing a long gown, so so I'm going to rewind what I just said right now. Sorry. Okay. When we see the Nine of Wands, we see this woman.
Pentacles.
Oh my God, damn. Okay. Let me...
Right, stop. Deep breath in, deep breath out. Center ourselves. Yeah.
Okay, amazing. So, yeah, when you were talking about the Nine of Pentacles, it just reminded me of the way that it's depicted in the Rider-Waite deck. So in the Rider-Waite deck, I'm just going to see if I can get this. I got this book. It's called The Ultimate Guide to Rider-Waite Tarot. So I'll show it to the camera if I can. And basically it has loads of symbolisms, loads of various meanings of what the book is, and it's just really helpful for sort of initially understanding the symbols, because when you've got the symbols down, then whatever tarot deck you use, now you're prompted, now you know something because it has that same symbol.
Exactly,
yeah. So with the Nine of Pentacles, obviously it's depicted very differently to your card. However, it's one of my favorite cards in the deck because it shows this woman in this glorious robe with various several flowers on it. She's got pentacles that have been embedded in this sort of like hedge, and it has loads of grapes, and that's supposed to show enjoyment, pleasure, sensuality. It's also trying to show the distribution of the pentacles shows the use and expression of personal abilities and needs. So when you see the Nine of Pentacles, it's, yes, I am taking the fruits of my labor. However, the fruits have been cut and been measured towards me because I've sort of accessed what it looks like to me. Does that make sense?
Exactly. Yeah. It's that harvesting energy actually, and I think that really clarifies the earth implications of this card and the Virgo implications of it. It's gain, material gain in that sense of it's something that you have sown previously. It's excuse me. That's always scary these days.
Literally.
Yeah. First one though all day. It's fine. So it's an energy of reaping what you sow, but in a positive sense. Like, you have sown the correct things, therefore you are going to get this material gain.
Beautiful. It says here, it makes a huge difference that you are living in the world. You have something which makes it into a richer place, so don't hide your talents under a bushel. Be generous, show your fellow human beings what treasures you have in store, because you yourself are priceless. That's really like sort of encouraging you to sort of take pride in yourself, and also like understand that it's your sort of birthright to enjoy life.
Exactly.
You know, like, that sounds really odd because we're in a quarantine and we're sitting at various desks opposite different sides of Manchester communicating. However, I haven't actually, it's been a long time where I felt this sort of calm, you know, and this sort of comforted being in my own space, because I'm allowed to sort of well, I've got all the time in the world to do the things that I've wanted to do.
Exactly. And I think that relates to the card very well in that, and it relates to the situation very well. If we're talking about after the lockdown, that kind of confidence and that kind of like awareness that I've done the right thing and I'm on the right path is what we're going to need, because it's going to be a, like, going back out again is going to be like relearning how to do this. And it's going to be, exactly.
Literally,
yeah.
But it's going to be relearning how to do it, but it's because no one has ever been in this experience before. It's going to be so heightened. Like, when we first go back out, all of our opportunities, all of our resources, all of our blessings are going to be literally flowing straight into our faces. We need to make sure that we've leveled up to accept them. And I think that's the sun again. And what was the card as well? It was the Queen of Swords, wasn't it? That's that professionalism, that articulate power within being headstrong, because it's all about your mental capacity. To appreciate this blooming sort of space that we're in now, you know?
Perfect. Yeah. Like,
Sorry,
it's like this lockdown it's internal work and it's preparation for making sure that when we are back out there, so to speak, we can do that mindfully and we can do that being conscious of what we're doing and not just get completely overwhelmed.
Yeah. Do you know what? This is a top quarantine tip I'm going to put to listeners right now. So, are you familiar with gratitude lists or gratitude journals,
The basic
etc.?
idea of it, I am, yeah. One thing a day you're thankful for.
Yeah, like maybe a couple months ago, maybe like just before last summer, I really wanted to change my relationship with happiness and gratitude, because I was relying on other things to make me happy. Like, let's say there's a cool event, or let's say there was a concert, or let's say there was an outfit. Like, I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna feel happy when this happens. I'm gonna feel happy when this happens. However, happy should be like my constant, or what? No, maybe appreciative, gratitude should be my constant, and then any other thing that I associate with good, that's just like a top up. It's like a level up. So every and during this obviously reflective, this isolated period, it can become quite repetitive. So I've decided to sort of reincite that whole gratitude journal thing. And when I wake up every day, I'll write 3 things that I'm really grateful for, I'm really happy for. Just because I want to change my relationship with happiness again. I want that to be, I don't want to change my relationship with happiness. I want that to be my relationship with happiness. That I am just like, it's weird because I keep on using happiness, but I don't really always like the term happy, because if someone comes up to me and they're like, oh my God, be happy, positive is going to be okay, oh my God, it's great, I'll want to box you in your face.
Exactly.
Do you know what I mean? Like, I will want to fight you. So I say happiness, or I say happiness as I mean content, you know? And so yeah, I've been practicing my, doing my journaling when I wake up, 3 things that I appreciate or that I'm grateful for or that I'm happy with. And even doing that, I know when this all ends, when this all pandemic has stopped, I am going to be bursting with enjoyment, just absolutely fulfilled by it, so satisfied, like to my heart's content, because I have done that work on changing what it means to accessing happiness or accessing and accepting gratitude.
Gratitude's a really good perspective for that as well, because like you were saying, there are issues with the word happiness because it sounds temporary and it sounds very cerebral, but seeing that, breaking that down to gratitude and enjoyment, and then there's that more kind of, you know, relaxed contentment, and then there's there's then a kind of like wellness that's more general than that. Like, those are all different factors. And so with a gratitude journal, you can hone in on, okay, being thankful and accepting, and going back actually to what we were saying before about having everything being related to some degree. Like, even if you are quite secular about it and you don't see it as a divine force, as again I know a handful of people listening to this might be, you should still be grateful for the people making the food you eat, just basic things like that. And
exactly. Grateful the shelter that you have over your head.
And doing that then changes your relationship to it, and you start seeing it as it's something you're no longer taking for granted, but you can see, oh wow, this is like, I have four walls around me. I have a landlord who isn't threatening to kick me out. This is amazing. Like, I can roll with that. Yeah. Mm.
Oh, amazing. Oh, well, mate, that has been absolutely lovely. I guess this brings us to our last segment, which is the direct message. I'm quite sad, you know, because I've actually really, really enjoyed this podcast. It's flown by. Let me get back on top form. So the direct message is a little section where we give listeners a take-home message from the podcast, a little food for thought or whatever. And is there anything that you want to leave listeners?
I think I'll leave people on that note of connection and also tools. We, as human beings, are just kind of wandering around trying to find that connection, and we live in a society that is very, very... that goes to great lengths to not acknowledge that. Everything from our relationship to the climate, to food, to other people. And stuff like astrology and tarot is a tool that you can use to kind of give yourself, like I said before, like just like a shot of that oneness, a shot of that holism, a shot of that interconnection, and use that as and when it's helpful for you to re-immerse yourself in that kind of reality of connection and go beyond the kind of very facile individualistic approach that we take in our culture that sees us as separate from animals, as separate from trees, as separate from nature. Yeah. That was so hippie, oh my God. But yeah.
Honey, don't worry, I've accepted it. Like, honestly, sometimes I will say something and then I catch myself and I'm like, wow.
It's but exactly what
we
you
love
need,
it. It's accepted here.
Yeah.
It's a safe space. Exactly. Like, we need us gentle babes to help navigate life, you know? Amazing. I guess, like, what I want to leave... following on what you said, what I want to leave listeners today is to talk about being seen in your entirety. I don't think people realise how much everyone individually wants to be seen in their entirety. We want to be seen as wholes. And again, I've said it before, but astrology provides you with so much detail, provides you with various forms of access to finding about who you are. So I encourage others to explore that. But within being seen in your entirety, you also need to respect how loads of other individuals don't have that privilege. They don't have that opportunity. And practices like tarot and astrology can be their only gateway to it. So I'm really, really happy for that. But also, I guess it's sort of like... giving the audience sort of a space for thought that I guess what I'm trying to say here is that we all, whether we want to acknowledge it or not, want to be seen in our entirety. And I think as soon as people acknowledge and respect that we all want to be seen as whole, even though nobody's complete, we're going to live in a happier place.
Exactly. And yeah,
because no one's
complete.
Nailed
it there. It's that it's accepting that desire and accepting the incompleteness is part of it. Yeah.
Oh.
There we go.
Amazing. Wow. Oh my God. Does that mean our podcast is done?
Sadly.
Oh my God, I literally have, like, it's flown by. Like, we've talked about so much today, but I'm so happy to have you as a guest.
No, and thank you so much for this chance to hold William Lilly up on camera.
Would you like... Would you like to plug in your socials, tell people how to find you, if they want to get in contact with you,
Well, the main thing that I didn't actually drop is that I am, alongside Ella Jo, I'm one of the many people in Studio Scum. So at Studio Scum on Instagram. Course, I write and do the odd performance piece with them. And I'm kind of like the gang wizard, I think, at this point. I'm also at Anthropology JPEG on Instagram. That's horrible to... Those are two very strange words, but Anthropology, ANTHROPOLOGY. God. And then JPEG, JPG. I thought that was smart when I did it, but then I got to say it out loud. It doesn't work, but that's me on Instagram. Yeah.
It's edgy.
Very.
Just think about it that way.
Oh, gorgeous.
Oh, amazing. Well, thank you so much for being here today. Like, I really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you so much, listeners, for listening.
Yeah.
I have really, really enjoyed this podcast, but I'm going to have to love you and leave you. My name is Sarah, and this has been DM Talks. If you want to email us or to contact us on socials, the email is dmtalks, TALKS 11 @gmail.com. We also are on Instagram via @dm.talks or at Goodgoodgood Media. But it was lovely speaking to you. I shall see you guys soon. Bye.
Bye.
Bloop.